Welcome everyone to Male Fuzz TV. I am Peter, and today I'm going to be talking about Peacemaker episode 1. This was a part of the pilot vote in Patreon. There wasn't a lot of pilots out this month, so I put a few pilots from earlier in the year that I never got to, and Peacemaker at the very least was high enough to review and look at the first episode. And this was a show that I should have checked the first episode out of and just never did at the time. I can't remember why exactly. But maybe I was just so sick of superhero stuff that I really didn't want to, even though I typically like James Gunn, and his Suicide Squad movie is pretty solid. It's pretty entertaining. It's got character arcs. John Cena's Peacemaker was one of the funnier elements of the movie, and this, by all accounts, is a show that he just created during the pandemic because he was bored and wanted to write a season of TV. And here we are, it's getting a season 2 at the very least. I don't know if we'll get much beyond that for a number of reasons, because, everything going at Warner Brothers and HBO Max right now, plus the fact that James Gunn is now the head of DC in general, which would make you think it would be safe, but he's also completely scrapping like the current universe and starting fresh. So maybe this will live on for a little while as just kind of this own little pocket universe of just its own thing, which would be fine. But so regardless, I say I'm going to talk about the first episode and my impressions. I'll keep it mostly spoiler free. I'll warn you later on before I get into any spoilers. As expected, it's a pretty solid, like, entertaining TV episode. Like, James Gunn's sense of humor, it doesn't always land like 100% of the time, but it lands pretty consistently often that it's hard not to get caught up in the ludicrous of what it is, which is typically what his comedy is. He does a lot of ludicrous stuff really well, from Slither to Super. If anything, the stuff in Guardians is the more muted of his sense of humor in some ways, because it's a bit more typical and less outrageous. Not that there's nothing outrageous in those movies, but it's not as outrageous as what he can be. In Peacemaker, and probably why the character appeals to him, at least in the way that he's chosen to portray him in the movie and now in this show, is like he gets to talk about very serious subjects, very serious issues. The core of the show seems to be Peacemaker coming to terms with the fact that everyone thinks he's racist and sexist, and trying to maybe alter or change and fit in the modern world. But his, a lot of the humor, some of it's dark humor that comes from the way he reacts to certain things when he's called out on them. But there doesn't seem to be a want to change, so there's kind of enough to latch onto in the character that, okay, he clearly wants to be better in some way, even if he's like a complete idiot in how he thinks about it and everything else. There's a conversation near the start of the episode where he's accused of mainly killing people of color, and instead of addressing it properly, he promises to kill more white people so that it'll even up the numbers, which is is the dark bit of comedy. Is funny because it's the opposite is what you should be doing, but it's funny. It's funny, it's just this over the top thing. And John Cena is very good in the role. John Cena, this like over the top character who is blissfully unaware of many things around him. He fits this perfectly. He's good at playing this big kind of, I don't want to say baby, that's maybe not quite right, but like he has this very childish way of looking at the world, but it's handled with the right tone that it always feels like there's kind of a point to be made. There's some satirical elements to come out of like the way he reacts to the world around him. No, I mean, this first episode, it sort of sets up where he is now after the first Suicide Squad. Well, not the first movie, but you know what I mean. After the movie he was in. And sort of the status quo, the fact that the premise of the show is that he's roped into being an agent for a small squad, a couple of whom are characters from the Suicide Squad movie, notably James Gunn's wife, and the sort of nerdier guy with the beard. They're there, plus a couple other characters, and it's kind of like they're in trouble because they kind of helped Task Force X in the movie and betrayed Waller a little bit, so they're getting this job as kind of a punishment. But they're going to do jobs with him, and he's going to assassinate targets that are, bad. At least that's what they're saying. They're bad people. It wouldn't surprise me if over the course of the show that we find out that that's not the case, but that's, what they're saying to him. So there's a lot of like, you know, humor of them having to deal with him. He's very awkward and like a child in the way he wants things or doesn't want things. Humor comes from that. You also have his father, played by Robert Patrick, who is this like old school, completely racist and sexist, sort of old school guy who is obviously clearly a big influence on who Peacemaker is and his personality, but he also puts him down a lot. He's also very dismissive of him, calls him homophobic slurs and things like that. It's like, okay, this is partly why he's so messed up. His father is like warped his brain from a young age. And you know, part of the show seems to be that he's going to want to try and break away from what his father has brought him up as and taught him. So there's, you know, there's a bit of a heart to things, despite all the absurd humor and the, you know, the very satirical poking at real issues through really absurd like situations and absurd reactions, and like the arguments presented from some of the characters are kind of wild. So, you know, so but obviously it's Robert Patrick's the T-1000. It's nice to see him. You do see a little bit of Amanda Waller, played by Viola Davis, which, you know, nice enough to see. So, you know, we get this setup of main characters, who's got a little squad. I suppose one of the things that I should also talk about is that you get to see all these main characters in a ridiculously over-the-top opening title sequence, which is a dance number. You know, like when it does its cold open, then it cuts to the opening title sequence. It's this dance number where it starts off with Peacemaker, and then some of the supporting cast come in and like do backing dancing for him, and then it's this big whole ensemble. It definitely sets a tone right away in saying that, you know, this show is mainly about having fun. And given how it came to be, which was James Gunn just decided to write it because it was the pandemic and he had nothing else to do, you kind of get the feeling, yeah, this is just going to be kind of some fun experimentation and doing some silly shit. And the entire last 10 minutes of this episode is, you know, because there's not a lot of action in this episode, it's mostly setting up the story, setting up the characters, and a lot of that's quite funny, but that's really all it is. And then the last 10 minutes has a surprising fight scene, which is ridiculous. I loved everything about it. There's a screenshot that I could probably share of something that Peacemaker's holding that he's pretending is a microphone, which really made me laugh, especially since it leads into the fight scene in question. And he's in his underwear for this fight scene. It gets more over the top as it goes, and then there's a great bit of gore right before the end of the episode. And let's not forget that he's got a pet eagle called Eagly, which, you know, also fun. So, the T's vigilante in this episode, we don't see him, we just hear from him in a voice message. Numerous voice messages, actually. So, be interesting to see what he's like. But, yeah. Honestly, like, there's not a lot to really fault here. The only critique I'd maybe have is something that always comes up when I'm talking about a first episode or, you know, a pilot, is that typically you want a hook at the end of the episode. And I suppose you could argue that this doesn't have a storyline hook, but it does have a, hey, this fight scene is the sort of thing you can expect on a regular basis. I mean, that is a hook, for sure. But typically what most pilots will try to do, the successful ones anyway, will try to just add a little, you know, I guess it's easy to just call it a twist, but something that says, oh, this is also a part of the story. It kind of opens up the scope a little bit. And, you know, like, there's I don't want to give examples because it would spoil, you know, most pilots, because that's kind of the one thing that's kept a secret for the end is, oh, the plot's also got this element to it, right? This is also what the show is really about. This doesn't really have that. It just kind of ends with this bombastic fight, which is great. It's a hook in that sense, but not like a plot sense. So, and it does almost feel like the plot in this is like the, you know, one of the most least important things in the entire show. It's about the characters, it's about Peacemaker's character arc, and it's about just having these silly scenarios and reactions and like inane debates over politically correct things to say. There's an entire debate about the phrase sugar tits at one point, which also gave me some chuckles. It's the sort of thing where you have this character who can say these really inappropriate things, and it's funny because it's pointing out issues in society, but it's always got that purpose. And there's always a chance that he's going to learn and grow from it. So you don't have to feel bad either that you're laughing at something inappropriate. You know, it always has the purpose. So yeah, pretty solid. Which I guess is just James Gunn's kind of MO as a writer more than anything else, and direction to a point. I mean, I wouldn't say there's anything overly special about the direction in this, from a cinematography point of view, anyway. And I don't know if like James Gunn's movies have ever struck me as visual tour de forces. Not that they look bad, but they've never struck me as like a cinematographer's movie. Like he's never really had that. What he's good at doing is making sure the actors create these really specific comedy tones, and like the tension or the mood between two actors in a scene when they're having a very awkward conversation that's always kind of funny. Like that takes a lot of direction to do, and James Gunn, it almost goes unnoticed because he just always does it, and it's a bit like if you watch any director who can't do this try and achieve these specific types of tone, it can come off really cringy and not work. But when you have a scene where it's Peacemaker sitting next to Agent Hardcore, right? That's the one who's played by James Gunn's wife. Like there's a scene where they're sitting in a bar and they're sitting there and there's just these awkward beats of silence between everything he's saying, and he keeps talking and she has to respond to him. Those are the types of scenes where like you need obviously the actors need to be good, but you need a director who can actually tell them what the mood of the scene's supposed to be, how the pacing of the dialogue's supposed to play out, and how it never ever feels unintentional. Everything is pinpoint accurate. It's actually kind of a weird scene. Like most of it makes sense, and it does this thing where some guy tries to hit on her and she tells him to piss off, and he calls her a bitch or whatever. But I had to laugh because like a minute later, like this other guy comes out and he's like really mad, and he's like, "What did you say to my friend?" It's almost like this guy was so hurt that a woman rejected him that he went and told his big tough brother to go beat her up because he's had his feelings hurt. And obviously like she's like this secret agent lady, she just kicks the crap out of him like immediately, and it's it's all played for a bit of fun. Obviously there's the point in the scene and the idea that Peacemaker's trying to come on to her, there's always a point to what it's doing. But I had to laugh at the like getting his big brother to beat up the mean lady who said something nasty to him. And by nasty, it was just leave me alone. It wasn't actually that nasty, but the way he reacted, you would think you would think she like insulted his like mother or something, and maybe shat on his like first pet's grave, or I don't know. But yeah. So, and there's a lot of scenes in this where the characters will stop and just have like sort of debates and back and forths, and because it's a TV show and not a movie, you get to spend that time doing that with the different groups of characters. And I also say it's a very well paced episode. It's only about 45 minutes. I always have this worry now with streaming shows that they're always going to be at least a full hour long, because I think a lot of shows look at runtime as being like, well, we are a prestigious show, and HBO shows are all an hour long, so we have to be 60 minutes no matter what. And I think it was so much in this episode's favor that it was only 45 minutes. I think it would have felt like too drawn out if they tried to make the same story beats play out over 60 minutes. I think this was a wise choice. I think it showed that James Gunn understands his pacing, understands what makes a satisfying chapter. And in terms of other superhero stuff, the opposite is true at Disney Plus, where they're making shows where everything feels like too short and that there's not enough in an episode to actually satisfy your taste for. You don't feel like you've gotten a full meal with each episode. You feel like you're just getting this like little short-changed amount, and I think this was the right amount of episodes. Basically, is what I'm saying. And I appreciate that, and because Disney Plus is the only one that has the problem where a lot of its stuff feels too short. Most places it's the opposite. Most places it's like, why is this episode of Wednesday 60 minutes? This is a lighter, like sort of dark comedy show. Like this doesn't have to be 60-minute episodes. Like not all the time. Maybe your first one or your big special finale or something. But so I appreciate that. I appreciate all that. So. No, it's an entertaining time. So I'll just say spoilers here quickly, just so I can talk about the final fight scene. I mean, more than anything else. And there's also the reveal that what the sort of the newer character who's with the team is Amanda Waller's daughter. That's like an important plot beat, so that's cool. But so after he tries to hit on Harcourt, Peacemaker's sitting there and he notices this woman staring at him. And I have to notice that I was very suspicious immediately of this woman. because she had what I can only describe as like a mullet. And it's set present day, so this really stuck out. She looked like she was like teleported from the 80s. And I don't think we actually ever hear her say anything to him. And then when they're fighting, she never says anything, which almost makes me think that she's not uttered a single word, and he's somehow ended up going back to her place and having sex, despite the fact that she's never said a single word to him. And because he just keeps talking, he's too, like, self-obsessed that he never even noticed that she wasn't talking. I think that's kind of funny when you stop and think about it. But yeah, so he uses people are going to think I'm pretending here, but I believe the sex toy that he picks up to use as a microphone is, I think it's called a wand. I could be wrong. If it's something else, it's some sort of, it's a vibratory type thing, but it's just it looks vaguely microphone shaped, and that's why he picks it up when he's listening to the record. And he, this is probably the best directed scene of the episode as well, because it does a really good job of like the women kind of just appear in the background as the camera's spinning around, and then she's over there getting the knife, and then eventually she attacks him. But we get this over the top fight where they're going through walls. Eventually he jumps out the window to get away from her, and ultimately fires the sonic boom from his new helmet, which just obliterates her into a puddle of blood, and it's wonderful. It's wonderful. It definitely feels like there's a budget at play here. It feels like, we can't have as much action as you can in a movie, like on a sort of consistent basis, but it felt like, oh, this is like, we can have big moments when we choose to, like, we're going to pace these out, but here's your big actiony moment. So the entire fight was entertaining to watch, and then the ending was really quite funny, which is good. So I think there could be a heart to this show as well, especially if some of these other characters on the team eventually want to like root for him and like stick up for him and have his back. Especially since he was in the movie, he was kind of like a villain. He was like the antagonist one who was like secretly working for the bad guys, or at least was, he was towing the company line, I guess. He ended up conflicting with the other characters as a result. Here it feels like, if this ends up being some kind of a redemption story, then like these other characters eventually not thinking he's a complete asshole and sort of siding with them in like a big moment could be a cool idea. So I mean, obviously everyone's already watched the whole season if you like the show, so my speculation doesn't really offer too much in that sense, but I think it's worth saying that a lot of this potential does feel here in the first episode, which is nice. So yeah, Peacemaker episode 1's pretty good. It's entertaining. The characters are generally quite funny, particularly Peacemaker himself, who is constantly getting into these little bickering fights with people, which usually elevates to sort of comical swearing. And there's a fight with his dad's neighbor at one point where they just start dropping F-bombs at each other, and it is kind of funny. Like, I think James Gunn understands when that can be funny and how to make it funny. Because sometimes you get stuff where people just start swearing. It just feels try hard. I think, again, his handling of tone and how he directs the actors to deliver their lines is really one of his great strengths, as far as his comedy goes, certainly. So, yeah. I liked the first episode of Peacemaker. So, by all means, let me know what you think of Peacemaker in the comments below. And it's worth mentioning, I say all this as someone who is very sick of superhero movies, and it helps that this doesn't really feel like a superhero thing. Like, he says he's a superhero, but he's Peacemaker. Like, he's not really. And it references a few superheroes, in fact, he accuses Aquaman of screwing a fish at one point, and then says he has no reason to not believe that some username online is lying to him, which I also thought was funny. But like, it doesn't really feel like superhero, even though it's connected to a superhero universe. So I never felt like bogged down in that stuff, which is nice. Honestly, the further away it stays from any of that stuff is probably for the best, at least for a while, I would say. So, good stuff. But yeah, that is my thoughts on Peacemaker episode 1. Thank you very much for joining me and hearing my thoughts. Hopefully I was, a little insightful, if not entertaining, or just generally passable as background noise, whatever it is you may be. Do you enjoy listening to me when you fall asleep? I'm okay with that. I can be a That could be a cure for insomnia. I'm happy. But that's me. So thank you very much for joining me. You can support everything by becoming a member of the channel. Super thanks. Or, of course, the most common way is to go over to patreon.com/MailFuzzTV and supporting us over there for any amount per month. But that is me. So thank you once again for watching or listening. I always appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?